Hey everyone, it's another Keymaster episode. I'm Sven, and today I've got my little buddy from Kentucky over here, Mr. Ben.
Hi, it's nice to meet everybody. I'm Ben Dewberry. I'm a product manager at Keyfactor, and I've worked here about 4 years now.
So Ben, what is the latest status with signing in the enterprise?
Yeah, when I started at Keyfactor 4 years ago, I had a lot of customers who were like, "Hey, we have this artifact we need to sign," and it was always like this ad hoc process that they were going through. So it was like, "Hey, I just need to sign this file." They go on to a client's system and they like manually go in and sign like this MSI or DLL or whatever it was. Today, I see a lot more of enterprises moving to CI/CD pipelines, and a lot of like that development workflow and a lot of that need for signing those artifacts comes at the end of those pipeline stages now. And so it's gotten like a little bit more complicated than just like, oh, what's the command to be able to sign the file? It's now like, oh, how do I integrate this into like a GitHub action or something like that?
And do you find it more, I guess, container-based at that point too with these CI/CD pipelines instead of probably more just on somebody's desktop that it's now this automated process, so it's probably containerized like everything else in this world?
Yeah, so like yeah, with the containerization of software, it's not just like going back to that example. It's not just that MSI now or that jar file. It's like okay, that now that's being bundled into that container or container image to go and to ship out to a customer to be deployed. And so now it's not just like signing the actual application itself, but like in some ways the container image that like is the app itself, and from a packaging standpoint. And so you want to be able to sign and do a verification of that for what you're consuming for, either private enterprise or stuff you're consuming from open source. And that's where there's been a lot of like movement in the last couple of years in that area.
And one thing I learned this summer in 2025 was that Docker has actually chosen to drop Notary and go with Cosign now.
I saw that. Yeah, we have a couple customers that were using Docker's Notary, but a lot of them have moved over to Cosign, and I would say that's like the dominant tool that's being used right now when it comes to container
Has there
signing.
been any changes in that side as far as signing with containers and Cosign, or?
Maybe just like the proliferation of the tool and the number of projects that have started using that. So like Cosign, for people that aren't familiar, is a component of the Sigstore project, which is a Linux Foundation project that kind of gives open source communities a way to have some level of supply chain security, where before there really wasn't much going on there. And so it's really interesting the way that it works. They've got an open source kind of public CA that people can,
The full show.
the full CO, yep. People can do like authentication against like a known trust provider. So like a Microsoft login or GitHub
Yeah,
login, something like that. And then you'll get issued a short-lived key from full CO, sign your container image or what have you. And then people can go and do the verification of that with their public transparency log, Record, probably. Yeah, not pronouncing it right, but yeah.
Now, do you find more customers coming to us looking to use private PKI for these signings instead of wanting to trust the full CO?
Yeah, so that is a thing that comes up in the enterprise. Customers have deployments, whether it's a JVCA or something else, and they're already using the identities being issued off of eJVCA for like maybe it's workload identities for Kubernetes or something like that. And their entire enterprise trust is built around this, internal CA that they have. And so when it comes to like deploying applications internally, a lot of them do want to be able to use, not only their private PKI, but also maybe instead of using like ephemeral short-lived keys, maybe they want to have like a signing key, like that's hardware backed in an HSM.
So they could be using a public trust cert too at that point when you're bringing HSM in.
Exactly that as well. And so that's where, we have products like Signum, like Sign Server that can kind of like integrate and work within the Cosign kind of environment and the mechanisms that it's using to be able to sign those container images. And we can do that, with our software, but keeping those keys backed on the hardware security module.
That's interesting. So then it's really come full circle with the CI/CD pipelines, being able to sign everything that comes through the CI/CD along with the containers and so forth like that.
Yeah, and you can build out like a whole flow. So like if you're, imagine you've got a pipeline, you're building some application, you're packaging that into a container, you've signed the, jar file, whatever you put in the container, you sign the container image. You can also generate like attestation material for that container image. So maybe you have a software bill of materials that's listing out, this is all the components of this container. You can sign the image, you can sign the SBOM, and you can like package those together, store that in the registry. And then before you go and you pull an artifact to be run, in Kubernetes, you can pull that down, and then you can use like policy controllers for Kubernetes, like Caverno, to set up a policy that's like, hey, if this image wasn't signed by my eJBCA deployment, don't allow it to run in my cluster. And so you get that kind of full end-to-end control over the supply chain in that way.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I see. That's a popular use case that's growing like more and more for customers.
That's really good to see too from a year ago when I talked about this before.
Yeah, yeah, and it's being able to kind of again plug that into the ecosystem of the PKI that people have, for the enterprise, because it's just like another use case for that enterprise PKI investment that people have made and have been doing things like workload identities for a while, and it could be that same
From
deployment
the
could be used for other
signing
things.
side, do you have a lot of customer asked at all about using short-lived keys for signing artifacts?
That does come up from time to time, and I love that we have an easy way for people to be able to enable that with peering with the JBCA, and so being able to issue those ephemeral certs in that way. A lot of the signing customers are doing is a mix of like, okay, is it public trust, is it private trust? Stuff that's going out publicly, obviously need public trust, and so there's certain ways you want to set that up and make sure that key's backed in the HSM, and we can accommodate that. But then there's also maybe use cases where, yeah, you want to be able to do ephemeral signing, short-lived keys, and there's mechanisms we have to be able to support that as well.
And the last fun question, how much do you get asked about signing with post-quantum these days?
Fair amount, more and more. It's happening. There's a lot of interest in composite certificates now that I know you guys have been talking about on some of these different series. But post quantum is definitely coming up for signing, and not just for being able to generate signatures, the CMS signatures or anything like that, but also for like things like timestamping. So being able to timestamp with post quantum as well, which is equally as important. So you're able to verify that signature later.
Do you find like what artifacts are asked about the most for post-quantum so far?
I would say it's mostly on the IoT side right now. We're getting the most kinds of questions. A lot of the native signing tools that exist out there from like Microsoft or Java, or even I think maybe Cosign that we were talking about, don't quite have support yet in them for post quantum all the way. But we can control the formatting with something like CMS with Sign Server. We can have that already implemented, but there is still, IETF drafts out for CMS doing with the MLDSA.
Yes, I've seen
There's
that.
also a draft for PJ, I think Open PGP with post quantum. So we're also kind of waiting for some of those standards to kind of come out and be finalized to be able to call that stuff like fully, production ready.
That's really good. So, I mean, great updates and thanks everybody. We hope you enjoyed the little updates to the signing world and we'll see you in the next episode.